Jack Nicholson is a man who has spent his life surrounded by lights, cameras, and applause. Yet at 88 years old, he broke the silence to speak about something that went far deeper than the roles he played. For decades, he's been the face of rebellion, madness, and charisma on screen. But when he finally spoke about his late friend Robin Williams, his words were different. They weren't scripted. They weren't rehearsed. They were raw, honest, and filled with a kind of sorrow that could only come from one legend remembering another. But before we reach that unforgettable confession, we need to step back and understand how Nicholson became the man who could command Hollywood, and why his reflections about Williams strike so deeply. Jack Nicholson was born John Joseph Nicholson on the 22nd of April, 1937, in Neptune City, New Jersey. His life began with a secret so dramatic it could have been written for a movie. For years, he grew up believing his grandmother was his mother, and his actual mother was his sister. That revelation only surfaced later in adulthood. Imagine the shock, realizing the people closest to you weren't who you thought they were. For Nicholson, this twist wasn't just a family secret. It was the kind of truth that shaped how he viewed the world and the roles he would later take on. Complex, layered, and often filled with hidden pain. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, Nicholson didn't have Hollywood in his backyard, but he had ambition. His early life wasn't glamorous, far from it. He started out working as a gopher at MGM's cartoon studio, fetching coffee and running errands. It was the bottom rung of the ladder, but Nicholson was already watching, learning, absorbing the rhythms of storytelling. He wasn't destined to stay invisible for long. Nicholson's acting career didn't start with Oscar-worthy roles. His early years were filled with small parts in B-movies, often produced by Roger Corman. These weren't the kinds of films that made headlines, but they taught him persistence. Hollywood is brutal to newcomers, and Nicholson had to claw his way forward. His breakthrough came in 1969 with Easy Rider. Playing the drunken lawyer, George Hanson, Nicholson gave a performance that critics couldn't ignore. The role earned him his first Oscar nomination and opened the floodgates for everything that followed. Suddenly, the world saw him not as a struggling actor, but as someone who could redefine what it meant to be a leading man. The 1970s were Jack Nicholson's decade. In 5 easy pieces, 1970, he captured the disaffected spirit of the era. In The Last Detail, 1973, he brought raw emotional power to a character who was both humorous and heartbreaking. But it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, that changed everything. His portrayal of Randall McMurphy, a rebellious man fighting against the system, was more than just a performance. It was a cultural symbol. Nicholson won his first Academy Award for the role, and McMurphy became an icon of resistance for an entire generation. Then came The Shining in 1980. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance, a writer descending into madness, was terrifying, unforgettable, and cemented in pop culture forever. "Here's Johnny," echoed across generations, a line improvised in the moment, proving Nicholson's instinct was as sharp as his grin. By the time he played the Joker in Batman, 1989, Nicholson had already become a legend. But his version of the Clown Prince of Crime was sinister, playful, and utterly magnetic. His Joker wasn't just a villain, it was the standard against which every future comic book villain would be judged. Nicholson wasn't just an actor, he was a cultural force. While his career soared, Nicholson's personal life kept tabloids busy. His one and only marriage was to actress Sandra Knight in 1962. They divorced 6 years later but shared a daughter, Jennifer. After that, Nicholson never married again, but his love life became a whirlwind of famous names and turbulent romances. There was Susan Ansbach, who later claimed Nicholson fathered her son, Caleb. Then came Angelica Houston, the daughter of director John Huston. Their on and off relationship lasted nearly 17 years, filled with passion, heartbreak, and public fascination. Huston later admitted that Nicholson's charisma was undeniable, but his infidelity eventually broke them apart. In the 1980s, he was linked with model Winnie Hallman, with whom he had a daughter, Honey. Later, his long-term relationship with Rebecca Broussard produced two more children, Lorraine and Raymond. Both eventually followed their father into the world of acting. Nicholson's personal life was as complicated as his characters, full of passion, conflict, and contradictions. But if one thing was clear, it was this: Jack Nicholson lived life on his own terms. Even as the years passed, Nicholson didn't fade. The 1990s and early 2000s brought some of his finest performances. In A Few Good Men, 1992, his explosive courtroom scene gave us one of the most quoted lines in film history. "You can't handle the truth." It wasn't just acting, it was domination. Then came As Good as It Gets, 1997. Playing a misanthropic novelist with obsessive-compulsive disorder, Nicholson balanced cruelty with vulnerability. The role won him another Oscar and proved that he could still reinvent himself decades into his career. In About Schmidt, 2002, he played a lonely retiree navigating grief and isolation. Critics called it one of his most understated and powerful roles. A year later, he surprised fans again with his comedic genius in Anger Management, alongside Adam Sandler. And in 2006, Martin Scorsese's The Departed showcased Nicholson as Frank Costello, a ruthless mob boss who stole every scene with his unpredictable menace. By 2007, in The Bucket List with Morgan Freeman, Nicholson had shifted into something softer, reflective, touching, yet still full of wit. It was a reminder that even at the height of his fame, Nicholson could still connect with audiences through vulnerability. It was during these years that Nicholson grew closer to Robin Williams, a man he described as lightning in a bottle. Williams was unpredictable, unstoppable, and unlike anyone else in Hollywood. He could walk into a room and turn silence into an eruption of laughter within seconds. Nicholson admired him not just for his comedy, but for his depth. "Robin was like lightning in a bottle," Nicholson admitted. "You never knew what direction he'd go in, but you always knew it would be brilliant." The two men were very different. Nicholson with his sharp, menacing charm, and Williams with his boundless energy and improvisation. Yet somehow, they understood each other. When they spent time together, there was always laughter, but also sincerity. Williams had a rare ability to listen, really listen. And in Hollywood, that was almost unheard of. At 88, Nicholson spoke about Williams in a way he never had before. He said that people saw Robin as a whirlwind of comedy, but that wasn't the whole story. "He was one of the most thoughtful men I ever knew," Nicholson admitted. "He felt things deeply, maybe too deeply at times. That was both his gift and his burden." Nicholson revealed that behind Williams' wild energy was a tenderness, a sensitivity visible in his eyes, even when he was making people laugh until they cried. To Nicholson, that duality was what made Williams extraordinary. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a man who gave everything he had, every single time. When Robin Williams passed in 2014, Nicholson felt the loss like a blow. "When Robin left us, it was like a light went out in the world," he said quietly. He remembered hearing the news and sitting in disbelief. It felt impossible that someone who gave so much life could be gone. Nicholson's words carried weight. They reminded us that even legends, people who seem larger than life, are still human. They feel, they struggle, they break, and sometimes their brightest gifts come with the heaviest burdens. For Nicholson, remembering Williams wasn't just about mourning. It was about honoring a friend who had touched his life in ways that few ever could. At 88, Jack Nicholson has nothing left to prove. He's a man who has shaped generations of cinema, from rebellion to horror, comedy to tragedy. But when he spoke about Robin Williams, his words cut deeper than any script could. He remembered not just the comedian, not just the actor, but the man, the listener, the friend. Nicholson concluded with a reflection that captured the essence of who Robin was. He wasn't just funny. He was extraordinary. And in sharing that truth, Nicholson gave us all a reminder that behind Hollywood's glamour, behind the awards and fame, the real legacy is the connections we leave behind. For Jack and Robin, it was laughter, respect, and humanity that tied them together. And those bonds will outlast even the brightest lights of Hollywood.